You know, when you hear the name Custer, you immediately think of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, right? Custer's last stand. It's legendary. But the real story, the one that really matters, isn't just about what happened on that battlefield. It's about the clash that led up to it. We're talking about a bitter feud between a president and his most famous soldier, a conflict where pride, politics, and some serious personal animosity spiraled into a national tragedy. So let's meet our two main characters. And honestly, you couldn't find two men who were more different. In one corner, you've got President Ulysses S. Grant. He's the quiet, steady hand, the guy who won the Civil War and is now running the country. And in the other corner, George Armstrong Custer, the boy general. He was basically a rock star in uniform, a guy who absolutely lived for the spotlight. Their personalities alone put them on a collision course, and as we're going to see, that clash would have absolutely fatal consequences. I mean, look at this guy. Custer was a true prodigy of war, no doubt about it, a general at just 23. But he was also a master of his own image. He totally cultivated this theatrical persona, the long golden hair, that signature red necktie, the big hat. He loved the camera. And man, the press absolutely loved him back. He was charismatic, he was fearless, and he knew exactly how to make himself the center of attention, always. And then you have Grant. He was the complete opposite. He was the system personified. Think about it. After the absolute chaos of the Civil War, Grant built his entire career and his presidency on order, on discipline, on a rigid chain of command. For him, the rules weren't just suggestions. They were everything. And Custer? Well, Custer seemed to treat those rules like they were a personal challenge just for him. So you see where this is going, right? This fundamental difference in how they saw the world, their careers, their duty, politics, you name it. It put them on a collision course long before that final campaign in 1876. It was the ultimate showdown, the showman versus the system. And this rebellious streak of Custer's? Oh, it started early, way early. At West Point, he graduated dead last. I mean, literally, last in his class. He collected demerits like they were trophies. But here's the crazy thing. Even then, one of his classmates said he was so exuberant that we all loved him. He was everything the button-down, by-the-book army was trying to stamp out. A born showman who just seemed to live for defying authority. And let's be clear, this wasn't just harmless rule-breaking like goofing off at West Point. Custer started wading into politics, publicly siding against Grant's allies on some really important issues. And then, in 1867, he got court-martialed for being absent without leave. Why? Because he went on this epic 150-mile ride just to see his wife. So you see, this wasn't just some soldier with a quirky personality. This was a clear pattern of insubordination, and it put him squarely in Grant's crosshairs. Okay, so the flashpoint for their final conflict, it didn't begin on a battlefield. It started with an expedition into sacred land. An expedition driven by a national crisis, and, of course, Custer's never-ending ambition for the spotlight. Just look at how quickly things spiraled completely out of control. In 1868, a treaty promised the sacred Black Hills to the Sioux Nation, forever. But then, just 5 years later, a huge financial panic hits the United States. Suddenly, the government is desperate for gold. So what happens? In 1874, Grant's own administration sends Custer to lead an expedition straight into the Black Hills, totally violating that treaty. And Custer, being Custer, makes sure to bring along miners and reporters. The second they find gold, right from the grassroots, as they said, well, the fuse was lit. It was only a matter of time before it all blew up. You gotta understand, this was not some quiet scientific survey. It was a publicity stunt, plain and simple. Custer's real job was to create a media frenzy, to get everyone back east whipped up and demanding that the government take this land. And the Lakota? They saw exactly what was happening. They had a name for the trail Custer's wagons cut through their sacred land. They called it the Thieves' Road. So while tensions on the plains were about to boil over, the conflict between our two main characters shifts. The next scene isn't in the West. It's in a hearing room in Washington, D.C., and it's a massive corruption scandal that's about to make this feud between Grant and Custer just explode. So what happens when a soldier's testimony doesn't just go after a high-ranking official, but implicates the president's own brother? For Custer, what he was about to do was an act of integrity, as he saw it. But for President Grant, it was the ultimate betrayal. See, Custer was called to Washington to testify in this huge corruption case involving the Secretary of War.
Okay, so Custer gets to Washington in March of 1876. He testifies before Congress in what was called the Belknap scandal. Now, a lot of his testimony was technically hearsay, but it was accurate and it was super damaging. But Custer didn't stop there. He started publicly socializing with Democratic leaders, Grant's biggest political enemies. And then he dropped the bombshell. He directly implicated President Grant's own brother, Orville Grant, in these corruption schemes.
You can just imagine how this went over. For Grant, this wasn't just politics. This was a deeply personal attack, a public betrayal coming from one of his own subordinate officers. His response was going to be swift, and it was going to be severe. That professional tension that had been simmering between them for a decade, it just erupted into pure, unadulterated fury.
Yeah, Grant was furious, absolutely furious. Custer apparently realized he'd gone way too far, so he tries to go to the White House to apologize to Grant in person. And Grant, he refuses to see him. He literally makes Custer wait for hours, only to finally send an aide out to tell him to get lost. It was a cold, calculated, and very, very public humiliation.
So what's Grant's next move? First, he strips Custer of his command for the big upcoming Sioux campaign. This was basically a death blow to Custer's career. But then Custer's powerful friends, Generals Terry and Sheridan, they step in and intercede for him. Custer himself sends this desperate plea directly to Grant, asking him to spare me the humiliation. In the end, Grant relents, but there's a catch, a big one. Custer can go lead his regiment, but he's going to be under the overall command of General Alfred Terry. Custer, a man who hated taking orders, was now on a very short leash. So Custer rejoins his regiment, his career literally hanging by a thread. You have to imagine his mindset. He was a desperate man. His reputation was in tatters. He'd just been publicly smacked down by the President of the United States. He even told another officer he was planning to cut loose from General Terry during the campaign. He didn't just need a win, he needed a smashing victory, something so spectacular it would make everyone forget the scandal and put him right back on top. And that desperation, that need for a smashing victory, born from a political scandal and a personal feud, well, it would lead directly to one of the most infamous military disasters in all of American history. So there, at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, driven by that desperate need for a career-saving victory, Custer recklessly divided his command. He attacked a massive, and I mean massive, village of Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. The result was annihilation. He and all 267 men under his immediate command were wiped out. And what was President Grant's final word on the matter? It was blunt, and it was brutal. He said, "I regard Custer's massacre as a sacrifice of troops brought on by Custer himself that was wholly unnecessary." There's no ambiguity there, is there? It's a final damning verdict on a tragedy that was shaped not just by bad battlefield tactics, but by years of personal animosity. And it really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? How often is history driven not by some grand strategy, but by something as simple and as dangerous as pride, politics, and a president's fury?